The first snowfall had melted into slush by the time Dr. Lena Morgan stepped out of the cab in front of the Mayo Clinic's Gander building. Her shoes sank slightly into the wet gravel, and for a moment she paused it because of the weather. But because of the gravity of the moment, her breath curled in the cold March air as she stared up at the sleek glass facade of the hospital. It was so different from the red-bricked institutions in Boston. Everything here was wide open, vast, and daunting. She had made this choice deliberately, Minnesota of all places. She told herself it was professional curiosity, that the role of senior cardiology advisor at one of the most renowned medical centers in the country was a career move, and yet, something in her chest tightened not. Unlike the silent murmur of a patient's heart before a diagnosis, she hadn't expected to feel anything at all. Inside, the lobby hummed with activity. Doctors in white coats, patients wheeled past in hushes of movement, the smell of sanitizer and coffee mixing in that strangely comforting way that only hospitals could create. Lena moved through it all like she had for 2 decades, calm, precise, untouchable. She checked in at the internal medicine floor, where a cheerful receptionist handed her a clipboard with her intake paperwork. "Your physicals with Dr. Daniel Reyes," the woman said, barely glancing up. Lena froze. "I'm sorry, who?" "Dr. Reyes, neurosurgery. He's covering physician onboarding today." "Lucky you, he's one of our best." Lena's fingers tightened around the clipboard. She thought of the name like an old scar healed over, but still sensitive when touched. She hadn't spoken to Daniel in almost 20 years, not since the night everything fell apart in Philadelphia. The way his voice had cracked, the look in his eyes when she said she couldn't stay, the silence that followed, the years that came after she considered excusing herself, asking for a reschedule, faking an emergency call. Instead, she walked toward exam room 4. When she entered, he was reviewing something on the tablet. Back to her. He wore navy scrubs, his lab coat hanging from a hook on the wall. His hair was shorter now, flecked with strands of gray at the temples. His posture was straighter, stronger. Time had filled out the angles of his face, but hadn't changed his presence. Focused, magnetic. "Ms. Morgan," he said without looking up. She cleared her throat. "Dr. Morgan." He turned. His eyes met hers. Time collapsed. For a few seconds, nothing existed except the rush of memory flooding back. Study nights in the anatomy lab, sharing takeout on fire escapes, walking home in the rain after rounds, the way he used to. Look at her like she was a question he never wanted to stop answering. His lips parted, but no sound came. Then, almost softly, she nodded, stunned by the sudden wave of vulnerability that surged within her. "Hi, Daniel." He blinked. "Wow, I didn't know it was you coming in today. I didn't know you'd be the one evaluating me." They stood in silence, 2 doctors and 2 former lovers, neither sure if they were speaking as professionals or as people whose hearts had once been deeply entangled. He gestured stiffly. "We can start, if you're comfortable." "I'm fine." The examination began like any other: blood pressure, reflexes, medical history. But every question, every moment of eye contact, felt loaded. He asked about her migraines. She hesitated when listing medications. Their hands brushed as he handed her the stethoscope. At one point, his fingers grazed her wrist to check her pulse. She felt her heart betray her faster, louder. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "I ran here," she lied. He gave a half smile. "You were always a terrible liar." Lena sat on the exam table, unsure whether to laugh or cry. It was surreal after all this time. After all the miles, they were here again, and nothing felt resolved. "So," he said, stepping back to give her space, "Boston finally let you go." "They offered me a sabbatical. I took it." "You're overqualified for a sabbatical." She didn't respond. Daniel looked down, at the tablet, then back at her. "I used to imagine this, that we'd run into each other, maybe in a conference hallway. I didn't think it would be like this." "Neither did I." His voice softened. "You look good, so do you." Another silence. This one more fragile. "I read one of your recent papers," he said finally. "The one on atrial remodeling, in long COVID patients. Elegant work. Thank you. I saw your name on a glioblastoma study. Impressive survival curve." His smile faltered. "Yeah, well, survival's a tricky word." There was something in his tone, bitterness, grief, that made her pause. She remembered, suddenly, that Daniel's father had died from complications during a spinal procedure. That was one of the reasons he pursued neurosurgery. She wondered what else life had brought him since then. "Daniel," she said quietly, "I didn't expect to see you again." "Neither did I." He looked up, eyes clear now. "But I'm glad you're here." She opened her mouth, then closed it. Too much, too soon, too raw. Instead, she stood. "Thank you for the exam." He nodded, stepping aside. "You'll get your full onboarding packet tomorrow. Welcome to Mayo." She reached for the doorknob. "Lena," she turned. "I never got closure," he said. "I think. I always hoped you'd come back one day. Maybe not to me, but here, somewhere near enough to ask why." She held his gaze, her voice just above a whisper. "Maybe I came back for the same reason." And then she was gone. Outside, the wind had picked up. Lena walked briskly through the glass tunnel connecting the buildings, her reflection ghosting alongside her on the window panes. Behind her, she left a trail of questions she wasn't ready to answer. But one thing was clear: some stories don't end. They simply wait for the next chapter, and hers had just turned its first page again. The hospital corridors seemed to echo louder the next day. Lena walked them not as a stranger anymore, but not yet at home either. She moved with the grace of someone used to being watched, posture straight, heels clicking, clipboard in hand, though inside she felt anything but composed. Her mind had lingered overnight on things unsaid, questions unspoken, but she pushed the thoughts aside the way she had learned to do over the years. The past, no matter how vivid, didn't pay attention to schedules, and today's calendar was full. Her morning rounds were efficient. She met with the cardiology team, familiarized herself with the inpatient workflow, and sat through a research briefing. At noon, she took lunch in the physician's lounge, quietly observing the flow of Mayo's internal culture, its rhythm, its hierarchies, its unspoken expectations. Everything ran like a well-oiled machine here. But the one thing she couldn't account for was Daniel Reyes. He hadn't reached out. Not a text, not a message. She wondered if he regretted being vulnerable yesterday. Vulnerability wasn't something she wore well, not since the last time. She let her guard down and found herself walking away from the only man who had ever made her question everything she thought she wanted. But fate, it seemed, wasn't done with them. Just before 2 p.m., her pager vibrated with a direct request. "Consult requested Reyes, D. Neurocardio Joint Case Review, or Conf. RMB2. She stared at the screen for several seconds before responding with a clipped, "On my way." The OR conference room was tucked deep in the surgical wing. The glass walls were partially frosted, offering some privacy but not enough to hide the outline of someone pacing inside. As she approached, the door swung open, and Daniel stood there, hands in his coat pockets, eyes unreadable. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice more formal than it had been yesterday. "I wasn't aware we had a case together," she replied. Stepping inside, he motioned to the screen. "We do now." On the display was the MRI of a patient male, mid-30s, with a cavernous brainstem malformation. But what drew Lena's attention was the accompanying cardiac data. "AV arrhythmias?" she asked. "Worsening over the past month," Daniel confirmed, "and an unexplained drop in ejection fraction." Lena tilted her head. "Are you thinking neurocardiogenic cause? Pressure on the autonomic centers?" "Possibly," he said. "But if we touch that lesion without cardiac stability, he won't survive the resection," she finished. Their eyes met. In that single moment, the wall between them thinned. Professional clarity had always been their language. It was what first connected them late nights in med school, debating pathophysiology over coffee-stained textbooks, challenging each other with differential diagnoses like dueling artists. They had always spoken best in data and instinct. Lena turned back to the screen. "I'd like to run a tilt table test and cardiac MRI. Rule out any underlying cardiomyopathy that could be exacerbating the response." Daniel nodded. "Already scheduled for tomorrow morning. I'd like you in the or during mapping, if we proceed." She hesitated. "That's a bit unorthodox." "So is this case." Their silence stretched. Lena finally said, "You didn't page me just because I'm the new cardio attending. I paged you because you're the best person for this case, and because I trust you." There was an ache in that statement, not romantic, but honest, and it moved her. Afterward, they walked together through the quieter south wing, where afternoon light streamed through long windows and made the floor shimmer. Their pace was unhurried, neither of them eager to return to the noise of their respective departments. "I saw the cafe," Lena said suddenly. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" "The Jazz Cafe in Minneapolis." The one we used to talk about opening. It's real now. Someone else built it, I guess. Different name, but same style. Brick walls, warm lights, vinyls on the shelves. He smiled, nostalgic. We used to dream big. She chuckled softly. You wanted Miles Davis nights. I wanted sweet potato pie on the menu. I still think about it sometimes, he admitted. Not the cafe, just that version of us. Lena looked out the window, her voice low. That version was naive. Maybe, but it was honest. The hallway narrowed, forcing them slightly closer. Their arms almost touched. The air between them shifted. I have a meeting, she said abruptly, stepping away. Cardiac transplant board. Daniel nodded, not trying to stop her. Good luck. As she walked off, she felt his gaze linger on her back steady, like a question waiting for an answer she wasn't ready to give. That night, back in her apartment, overlooking Silver Lake, Lena found herself rereading old emails she never sent. One was dated July 12th, 20 years ago. It was the week she left Philadelphia. The draft simply read, I'm not running from you. I'm running from who I'm becoming. She had forgotten writing that in the morning she would meet with Daniel. Again, another patient, another decision, another layer peeled back. But tonight, she let herself remember, not just the pain but the music, the laughter, the dreams stitched into her bones that she thought she had buried beneath ambition. Outside, the city glowed gently under the weight of dusk. Inside, something was stirring. It wasn't regret, it was recognition. The sun had yet to rise when Lena stepped into the cardiac observation wing, coffee in hand, mind already circling around tomorrow's, or prep. She preferred to arrive early before the hum of conversation, the pages, the endless interruptions. This hour belonged only to the quiet. It was where she felt most grounded, and lately, it was the only space where she didn't feel his presence, pressing into every corner of her thoughts. That it had been 6 days since that first consult with Daniel. 6 days of polite updates, shared notes, clipped conversations in conference rooms. Professionally, their rhythm was seamless as though 20 years of silence had been a single skipped beat. But beneath the surface, something unspoken lingered, like static between radio stations, not quite audible, but always there. She was reviewing a patient chart when a knock pulled her attention to the doorway. Morning, said Dr. Madeline Pierce, peeking in with a tight smile and a folder under her arm. Her ash-blonde hair was tied back in its usual low bun, surgical cap still in hand. Lena stood. Morning. Didn't expect to see you before rounds. I didn't expect to be here. Daniel asked me to drop these off. She extended the folder, and Lena took it, their fingers brushing slightly. New labs for the Reyes case, Lena asked. Actually, Madeline hesitated. No, it's yours. Your performance eval packet from onboard. Admin asked me to hand it off since I'm running through B2 anyway. Oh, Lena said, surprised. Thanks. Madeline lingered. There was a pause that felt less like professionalism and more like calculation. Finally, she said, I've known Daniel for 8 years. Lena froze. Madeline's voice was steady, not sharp, not hostile, just deliberate. We've worked together on a lot of cases, some difficult ones. I've seen him at his best, and at his worst. Lena nodded slowly, unsure where this was heading. I'm not here to warn you off, or make this awkward, Madeline added. But I thought you should know he used to talk about you. Not often, just in those moments when something reminded him of something that clearly wasn't here. Lena held her gaze. That was a long time ago. Madeline smiled faintly. Sometimes time doesn't erase things, it just stores them deeper. Then she turned and walked away, leaving Lena with the folder, her unfinished coffee, and a sense that something had quietly shifted. The rest of the day passed like a slow, unwinding clock. Lena found herself distracted less by the work, and more by the creeping sense that Daniel's past hadn't stayed buried. She couldn't tell if Madeline's comment was a warning, a confession, or a peace offering, but it stirred something vulnerable in her, a reminder that Daniel hadn't been frozen in time waiting for her. He had lived, worked, healed, maybe even loved. That night, Lena took a different route home. Instead of cutting through the hospital tunnels, she exited through the west atrium and walked toward Silver Lake on foot. Snow flurries hung in the air, not yet enough to coat the sidewalk but enough to tinge the air with crisp anticipation. She welcomed the cold. It made things sharper. The lake was nearly frozen, a sheet of black ice catching the pale lights from the street lamps. She stood at the edge, staring out over the stillness. Her breath a small cloud in the night. She thought of Philadelphia, of the fire escape, where she and Daniel used to sit during residency, watching sirens blur past on the street below, of the last night before she left, when she told him she had accepted the research position in Boston. He had asked her not to go, not in some dramatic, cinematic way, just a single sentence. What if you're leaving something real? And she had said, real doesn't always mean right. She hadn't even cried. Now, 2 decades later, she wished she had done something, anything that proved it mattered. Her phone buzzed. She looked down. Daniel Reyes. Can we talk? She stared at the screen for a full minute before responding. Lena Morgan, about the case. Daniel Reyes. Not this time. He suggested a cafe near the Mayo Civic Center, quiet, out of the way, filled with locals instead of scrub wearers. Lena arrived first, ordered chamomile tea, and sat near the window. When Daniel walked in, she was struck by how tired he looked. Not physically. There were no bags under his eyes, no slump in his shoulders, but his expression carried something wary, something he hadn't shown during hospital hours. He sat without a word, both hands wrapped around a black coffee. For a while, they just listened to the clink of mugs, the soft jazz humming from the speakers. Then he said, "Did Madeline talk to you?" Lena didn't answer right away. "Yes, I didn't ask her to." "I didn't think you did." Daniel leaned back. "I didn't mean for any of this to be confusing." "I'm not confused," she said, more sharply than intended. He nodded. "Then I am." She set down her tea. "Daniel, why now? Why reach out after all this time?" "Because you're here," he said plainly. "And because I never stopped wondering what might have been if we'd had a different ending." She looked down, then back up, and when she spoke, her voice was softer. "You said you used to imagine seeing me again. I did too, but I never thought it would be here, like this. I thought I had put it all behind me. Have you?" Lena didn't respond. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He slid it across the table. "I was cleaning out some boxes last year, found this, never opened it." Lena blinked. "What is it?" "A postcard. From you, dated 3 years after you left. You never sent it." She picked it up slowly, running her fingers along the edge. It was yellowed with time, corners bent. She recognized her own handwriting. He nodded toward it. "Go ahead." She opened it carefully. Daniel, sometimes I wonder if what we had was just youth pretending to be love. But then I remember the way you looked at me during that last snowfall, and I wonder if we left something unfinished." Lena folded the card. Again, her hands trembling slightly. "I wrote that after my first solo surgery," she whispered. "A boy 17 years old. His mother cried afterward, and I didn't know how to hold that grief. I wanted to call you." "You should have," he said. "I didn't think I had the right anymore." Daniel's voice cracked slightly. "You always had the right." They sat in silence, hearts thudding in sync again after too long apart. Finally, Lena asked, "What are we doing, Daniel?" He smiled sadly. "I don't know, but maybe we stop pretending we're just colleagues." She shook her head gently. "It's not that easy." "No," he agreed, "but it's honest." When they stood to leave, the snow had thickened, blanketing the streets in a soft hush. Daniel offered his arm, and for a moment, Lena hesitated. Then she looped her arm through his. It wasn't a declaration, it wasn't a promise, it was a beginning. And after all these years, beginnings were more sacred than endings. The snow had continued into morning, laying a heavy quiet over Rochester. Lena stood by her window, a mug of green tea warming her hands, watching as the city stirred beneath its winter shell. It had been 3 weeks since that night at the cafe with Daniel. 3 weeks of measured connection, brief text messages between surgeries, and longer glances in conference rooms. They hadn't labeled anything, no declarations, but something between them had shifted like tectonic plates, realigning beneath their professional veneers. And yet, Lena felt the familiar resistance rising, the kind that whispered warnings when something felt too close, too real. Her instinct had always been to control her surroundings, her image, her risks. Love, she had long believed, was the one thing that could not be controlled, that made it dangerous. And in medicine, danger was to be avoided. Still, something had cracked open inside her. At the hospital, the joint case was nearing its most critical stage. Their patient, Noah Lancaster, was scheduled for resection in 4 days. Lena and Daniel had spent hours in preparation running simulations, reviewing imaging, consulting with interdisciplinary teams. It was high risk. A single miscalculation could render the man paralyzed or worse. But they worked with the same synchronicity they always had, speaking a language built over years of shared training, instinct, and unspoken understanding. Late that evening, after rounds, Lena stopped by Daniel's office. The door was ajar, lights still on. She knocked gently. "Come in," he said, without looking up. He was surrounded by imaging prints and surgical pathway sketches, a familiar chaos of minds preparing for precision. "I brought you something," she said. He glanced up, surprised. "Is it coffee?" She shook her head and held up a small white takeout bag. "Your favorite? The Thai place on 3rd. Chicken satay with too much peanut sauce." Daniel chuckled. "Genuine. You remembered." "I remember everything," she said, setting it down on the corner of his desk. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes lingering on her. "Even the things we never said." Lena hesitated, especially those. There was a stillness. They're not awkward, but fragile, like standing on ice, unsure how thick it was beneath your feet. "I was going to marry you," Daniel said quietly. The words landed without warning. She stared at him, mouth slightly parted. "I had the ring. Back in Philly. I carried it in my coat pocket for 3 weeks. Lena's breath caught. "Why didn't you?" "I was waiting for the right time. And then, you were gone." She stepped closer, voice barely audible. "You never told me." "I didn't want you to stay out of guilt," he said. "I knew how much Boston meant to you. It didn't mean more than you." "Then why did you go?" The question had lived in the marrow of their story for 20 years, and now, it sat in the space between them like an open wound. Lena exhaled. "Because I was scared. Scared that if I stayed, I'd lose myself. That everything I'd worked for would disappear into us, and I couldn't see a version of me that had both love and ambition." Daniel looked down. "And now, I still don't know if I can have both," she admitted. "But you're here," he said. She nodded. "I'm here." It wasn't an answer, but it was the truth. He stood, moving slowly toward her. "Do you want to know what I missed the most?" She tilted her head. "Your laugh," he said. "That kind of breathless laugh you only do when you're truly surprised. Like the world just gave you a gift you didn't expect." Lena smiled faintly. "I haven't laughed like that in a long time. Maybe it's time." They didn't kiss. There was no cinematic embrace, just the soft hum of the heater, the smell of peanut sauce, and the heavy gravity of being in the presence of someone who still knew the architecture of your soul. They stood like that until Lena's pager buzzed. "Emergency consult," she said, reading the screen. "I see you." Daniel nodded. "Go, I'll be here." And she left, heart full, spine straight, walking not toward duty, but toward something larger than herself. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Her mind kept returning to Daniel's face, his voice, the revelation of the ring he once carried, and the ache of knowing that the version of her back then had never believed she was worthy of such love. In the early hours, Lena found herself sifting through an old digital journal stored in her cloud account. It hadn't been opened in years. The entries were messy half-thoughts, hospital notes, memories scribbled between call shifts. But one passage caught her eye, dated just after she moved to Boston. "Every time I achieve something, I feel a strange emptiness, as if success, without someone to witness it with me, is just a well-decorated silence." She read it twice, and then she closed her laptop. 3 days later, the resection surgery took place. Lena was in the OR beside Daniel, heart steady, hands calm. The room was tense, every breath held as he navigated the brainstem with surgical grace. When it was over, when the tumor was and the vitals held, Lena finally allowed herself to breathe. In the scrub-out room, Daniel looked at her with exhaustion and wonder. "We did it. We did." Neither said what they truly felt, that the partnership they once thought had died in Philadelphia had just been reborn on a Mayo Clinic operating table. The following evening, the hospital held its annual winter fundraiser, gala tradition Lena had tried to avoid. But Daniel texted her, "Come, no expectations, just music and warmth." She wore a dark navy dress with sleeves like waterfall silk, simple earrings, and no perfume, just like he always liked. When she entered the ballroom, lit with golden lights and echoing with soft jazz, she saw him near the bar. He was laughing with a group of colleagues, but the second he saw her, his expression changed. His posture straightened, his eyes softened. and he walked toward her without hesitation. "You're stunning," he said. "You clean up pretty well yourself." They danced once, slowly, not as lovers, not as strangers, but as two people relearning a rhythm that had never truly left them. And when the song ended, Daniel leaned in. "I don't want to lose you again," he whispered. Lena closed her eyes. "Then, don't," she replied. And in that moment, beneath the chandeliers and the string quartet, something quiet and sacred began again. Not from the beginning, but from where they once belonged. Lena sat in her car, long after pulling into her apartment's underground garage. The engine had gone silent minutes ago, but she made no move to get out. Her hands rested on the steering wheel, unmoving, her mind running through moments on a loop, flashes of Daniel's hand in hers at the gala, the steady rhythm of their dance, the quiet confession at the end of the song. It had felt so right, so earned. But now, with the music gone and the spotlight dimmed, the fear returned like a tide she couldn't hold back. Outside the windshield, snow clung to the rim of the garage entrance. Her wipers, still up from the cold, looked like arms raised in surrender. She wasn't ready, not for this, not yet. The next morning at the hospital, Lena buried herself in her patients. She reviewed charts she had already memorized, sat in on consults where her presence wasn't required, and triple-checked pre-op vitals for the next day's procedures. Anything to keep from thinking about the door that had opened between her and Daniel and what it meant to step fully through it. But of course, she couldn't avoid him forever. They were due for a joint debrief of the Lancaster surgery. As she entered the small glass meeting room, Daniel was already seated, reviewing the report. He looked up and smiled. "I got us coffee," she nodded, sliding into the chair opposite him. "Thanks." They ran through the post-op data in practiced cadence, voices professional, precise, but the space between their sentences had changed. There was a weight now, not from unresolved anger or regret, but from possibility. A door ajar. When they finished, Daniel didn't move. "You've been quiet," he said. Lena took a breath. "I've just been thinking about us." She hesitated, then nodded. "I don't want to push you," he said. "You know that. But I need to know, as that night just a moment, or something real." She looked at him. In that moment, he was the same man she had once chosen to leave behind, not because he was lacking, but because she had been terrified of what loving him would demand of her. She had thought ambition and connection couldn't coexist. Now she wasn't so sure. "I don't know how to do this slowly," she said. "Then don't," he replied. "Let's just do it honestly." The line hung in the air between them, a bridge not yet crossed. That evening, she called her sister in New York. Ava answered on the second ring. "Hey stranger." Lena smiled. "Still up? I have a toddler, remember. Sleep is a myth." They laughed, the sound grounding her. "Okay," Ava asked. Lena hesitated. "Do you remember Daniel?" A pause. "From med school." "Of course I do. Tall, quiet, used to make you grilled cheese on call nights." "Why?" "He's here. We're working together again." "Oh wow," Ava said. And something's happening." Maybe it never stopped. Ava was quiet for a moment. Then, she said, "You've always been good at saving people. But maybe this time, you need to let someone save you, too." Lena blinked back sudden tears. She hadn't realized how badly she needed permission to be vulnerable. The next weekend, Daniel invited her to his place for dinner. It was a brownstone just outside downtown, warm, filled with wood and books and music. Not staged, not pristine. "Lived in. I never moved out of the city," he said, handing her a glass of wine. "I thought about Boston once, after you left. But I guess I stayed hoping something might bring me back to the version of myself I was with you." She looked around. "It's beautiful." "You say that like you're surprised." "I'm not," she said, then smiled. "Okay, maybe a little." They cooked together rosemary chicken, roasted vegetables, nothing fancy, but it felt intimate, like the years had folded in on themselves and brought them back to a place they had never really left. After dinner, they sat on the couch, a jazz record playing softly in the background. Daniel turned to her. "Tell me something you've never told anyone." She thought for a moment. "When I left Philadelphia," she said, "I cried on the train, quietly, behind my coat collar. I didn't cry for leaving the job, or the city. I cried because I knew I had broken something that mattered." He reached over, took her hand. "And now, I'm afraid I'll break it again." "You won't," he said. "You're not the same person." "And neither am I." She nodded slowly, her fingers curling around his. But just as the silence turned tender, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it. A message from Boston General. "Dr. Morgan, are you available for a consulting opportunity in April? It's a grant attached to your prior research on glioblastoma recurrence. High visibility. 2 months." She stared at it, the words swimming. Daniel noticed her change in expression. "Bad news." She hesitated. "No, just a reminder of another life." He didn't press. That night, as she walked home beneath a quiet Minnesota sky, Lena felt the tension building again, the pull between the groundedness she felt here and the weight of the identity she had built elsewhere. Boston had been her proving ground, her refuge, her escape, and now it was calling her back. The next few days passed in quiet hesitation. She didn't mention the offer to Daniel, not yet. Instead, she buried herself in work again, but he sensed the distance returning. One afternoon, as they reviewed imaging for a complex pediatric case, he looked at her and said, "You're pulling away." She didn't deny it. "There's something I haven't told you," she admitted. He waited. She told him about the offer, about the funding, the timeline, the opportunity. Daniel was quiet. "Are you going to take it?" he asked. "I don't know." He looked away, jaw tightening. "You always leave when it starts to matter." Her stomach clenched. "That's not fair," she said. "Isn't it?" he asked gently. "You left once, and now, when something starts to feel like a future again, you have one foot out the door." She looked at him, eyes flashing. "This isn't easy for me. I didn't come here planning for this. I didn't expect you. I didn't expect to feel anything again. But you do." "Yes," she said. "I do." They stared at each other, both breathing hard. Finally, Daniel softened. "I'm not asking you to choose me over your career, but I need to know if you leave again. Is it forever?" She didn't answer. She couldn't. That night, Lena sat at her kitchen table, long after the lights had dimmed. She pulled out an old notebook, flipping past blank pages until she found the one she had scrawled in years ago. "You can be brilliant without being alone." She had written it during her first big grant win, but even then, she hadn't believed it. Maybe it was time to start. She picked up her phone and began typing a message to Boston General. She didn't hit send, not yet. The future was no longer a thing to chase blindly. It was something to build, piece by fragile piece, with hands open and heart willing. And maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't require her to leave something behind to move forward. Lena stared at the message again the next morning, the draft still unsent on her phone. It had been 5 days since she'd first read the consulting offer from Boston General. She had done everything but decide. She'd walked through snow-covered parks, wandered museum halls in silence, cooked half meals. She didn't finish anything, to avoid confronting the truth that gnawed inside her. This wasn't just about a job, it was about identity. It was about the version of herself she had fought to become, the one who built walls of competence and independence so no one could question her worth, least of all herself. The invitation back to Boston wasn't just professional validation. It was a call from a life that had once protected her from heartbreak, the life she had shaped in the aftermath of losing Daniel. But something had shifted. That life didn't fit as perfectly as it once did. It felt heavier now, like armor worn too long. She had begun to wonder, what was the point of climbing if he had no one to witness the view? That afternoon, Lena found herself sitting with Noah Lancaster during his rehab session. His speech was still slow, his left side partially weak, but his spirit was resolute. "Don't let them fool you, Dr. Carter," he said between breaths. "A stroke messes with more than your body. It messes with your sense of time. You think you've got years left, then suddenly you realize it's all one breath away from vanishing." She smiled gently. "You're recovering fast. You're doing the hard work." He looked at her, eyes clearer than she expected. "Yeah, well, hard work doesn't matter if you're chasing the wrong thing." The sentence sat with her like a mirror. Later that evening, she walked the familiar hallway to Daniel's office, unsure if he would even want to see her. Their last conversation had ended in tension, a silence neither had broken since. He paused. Outside the door, it was closed. The light inside was on. She knocked, no response. She knocked again, louder, still nothing. Finally, she cracked the door open. He wasn't there, but on his desk. She noticed a framed photo she hadn't seen before, younger Daniel with his parents, all three smiling with a kind of joy Lena hadn't seen on his face in a long time. She stepped inside, gently, like entering a memory. A patient file lay open, pages full of notes in Daniel's precise handwriting. She resisted the urge to read it, but beside the file was a book When Breath Becomes Air, with a sticky note tucked inside. Page 107. You can't ever reach perfection, but you can believe in an asymptote toward which you are ceaselessly striving. She sat down in the chair, across from his desk, the silence closing in like an embrace. She wasn't here to chase perfection. She was here to make sense of a future she could barely name. The door clicked open. Daniel stopped when he saw her. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said. I wasn't sure either. He walked in slowly, sat down across from her, eyes steady. I haven't sent the message yet, she said. What message? The one to Boston. He inhaled. You've been thinking too much. They sat in quiet. Then she said, when I was a kid, I used to build elaborate sandcastles at the beach. Not just the towers, but moats, bridges, windows. I spent hours on them, but the tide always came. No matter how far back I built, it always reached me. He tilted his head, listening. I think I built my entire adult life like those meticulously control, achievement, isolation masquerading as strength, but it's all been a way to stay ahead of the tide. And now I think I want to stop running. His voice was soft. Even if the tide comes, especially if it does. Daniel's hand reached across the table, palm open, waiting. She placed hers into it without hesitation. Then, come with me tomorrow, he said. Where? My parents' house. It's my dad's birthday. Small thing. You won't know anyone except me, but it'll be honest, unpolished. She looked uncertain. He added, no pressure, just a moment outside the hospital walls. She nodded. Okay. The next day the drive to Winona was quiet but comfortable. Snow flanked the roads like nature's punctuation, the Mississippi frozen in silver stillness along the way. Daniel played Coltrane softly on the speakers. Lena stared out the window, the past and present coexisting like two versions of the same song. I haven't done this in years, she said suddenly. Family stuff. Meeting someone's family. He smiled. They're not that scary. I'm not worried about them. He glanced at her. I'm worried about how it'll feel, she added, to be known again. Daniel didn't respond immediately. Then he said, it feels like exhaling after years of holding your breath. When they arrived, Lena was greeted with the warm embrace of real life. Daniel's father, Richard, retired schoolteacher, gregarious, slightly deaf, hugged her as if she were already family. His mother, Grace, quieter but no less perceptive, offered her a plate of lemon bars and a knowing smile. You've always been his favorite chapter, Grace whispered when Daniel stepped away. Lena laughed nervously. We were just young. Being young doesn't mean you weren't real, she replied. Dinner was chaotic and sweet. Daniel's nieces ran under the table with frosting on their sleeves. Richard told the same story 3 times. Grace asked Lena thoughtful questions, but never pried. And when the cake came out, Daniel stood beside Lena, his hand resting lightly on her back. It wasn't grand. It was everything. Later, as they walked through the back garden dusted in snow, Daniel said, I used to come out here when things felt too loud inside. Lena looked around. It's peaceful. Growing up, I wanted noise, big city, big dreams. But the older I get, the more I think peace is the real prize. She nodded. It's strange. I've chased noise my whole life. And now, silence is what scares me. But not this silence, he said. No, she admitted, not this. They paused, facing each other. Daniel brushed a strand of hair from her face. I don't want you to stay here for me. I'm not. Then why? Because I'm tired of measuring my life by who I'm not allowed to love. He stepped closer. Then stay. She looked up at him, eyes wet. Okay. No grand promise. Just a breathless agreement, rooted in truth, the kind that needed no more words. The winter deepened. Rochester wore its cold like a second skin-coated sidewalks, thick skies, and early twilights. It had been 2 weeks since Lena visited Daniel's family in Winona, and the quiet afterward felt heavier than she expected. There had been no dramatic shift in their daily routines. They still passed each other during morning rounds, exchanged quick texts about patients or dinner ideas, worked side by side in the OR with seamless familiarity. But something unspoken had entered the space between them, a deeper presence, a sense that what they were building now wasn't just about healing what had been lost. It was about learning how to live differently, together. And yet, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that she was on the edge of something she didn't fully understand. On a Monday morning, she arrived early for a consult and found Daniel already in the conference room, reviewing a neuro case. The windows behind him glowed with a frost-filtered sunrise. "Couldn't sleep either?" she asked, setting down her coffee. He didn't look up. "Something like that." She studied his profile, his jaw tense, eyes tracing the imaging scans with unnecessary intensity. Something was wrong. "What is it?" He finally looked at her. "My father collapsed last night. Grace called me at 2 a.m. They're doing tests at Mayo South. It could be cardiac, but they're not sure." Lena felt her breath catch. "Why didn't you call me?" He shook his head. "It was late. I didn't know what to say." She moved closer. "Is he stable for now?" He looked tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but the exhaustion of emotional weight pressing into every thought. "I'll come with you after rounds," she said. "You don't have to." "I want to." They drove together in silence, the car cutting through slush and salt-covered streets. At Mayo South, the air inside was warm and clinical, too bright, too antiseptic. Daniel led the way to his father's room. Richard looked smaller than Lena remembered, his skin paler, fatiguing trailing like vines. But his smile when he saw them was intact. "Well, if it isn't the dream team," he said weakly. Daniel forced a laugh. "Still cracking jokes. That's a good sign." Grace stood nearby, composed but frayed at the edges. "They're running more tests," she said quietly to Lena. "They don't think it was a full heart attack, but his EKG was irregular, and they found something on the echo." Lena nodded. "Gently, we'll help figure it out." After the nurse finished her checks and left, Richard gestured at the chair beside him. "Sit down, son." "You too, Lena. I want to say something before the next parade of residents comes in." They sat. Richard cleared his throat. "You know what's funny? I've been teaching history for 37 years, told thousands of kids about the lives of emperors and soldiers, presidents and poets. But you know what no one ever teaches you? How to say goodbye while you're still here." "Dad," Daniel warned softly. "No, let me say this," he insisted. "Daniel, you've made a life I'm proud of. And Lena, I only met you recently, but I see how you look at each other. It's rare. Most people spend their whole lives orbiting someone, too afraid to land. Don't waste your time in orbit." His voice cracked slightly. "Grace and we've had 50 years. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And when you're lying here, trust me, real is all that matters." Lena reached over and took his hand. "You're not going anywhere, Richard." He smiled. "Even if I do, I'll go grateful." That evening, back at Daniel's apartment, Lena cooked without talking much. A quiet tomato bisque, toasted sourdough, nothing fancy. The kind of food that felt like safety. Daniel opened a bottle of wine but didn't pour it. He just held the bottle, turning it slowly in his hand. "I used to think grief was a sudden thing," he said. "Something that crashed in, but now I think it's more like erosion. It wears you down, even before the loss." Lena stirred the soup, letting his words settle. "I don't know what I'm doing, Lena." She looked at him. "With you, with all of this, it feels like I'm relearning everything, how to let someone in, how to trust it won't fall apart." She put the spoon down. "I'm not asking you to know. I don't know either. But I do know I'm here, and I'm not walking away this time." He met her eyes. "Promise." "No, not a promise, a choice, every day." Daniel walked toward her slowly and kissed her forehead. They didn't speak after that. Just soup and soft music. Quiet intimacy. In the days that followed, Richard's tests came back. Aortic valve degeneration. Not immediately fatal, but serious. Surgery would be needed within the next few months. Daniel took the news hard, though he masked it well. He dove deeper into work, staying longer at the hospital, taking on extra consults. Lena recognized the pattern: withdrawal disguised as purpose. She had lived it herself for years. One night, after a particularly long shift, she found him alone in the residence library. The lights low, a surgical anatomy book open but unread. "I know this play," she said gently. He looked up. "Grief, avoidance," she continued. "Overfunctioning, pretending productivity is control." Daniel laughed, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Do I get points for self-awareness?" She sat beside him. "Only if you let yourself feel it." He stared ahead. "I thought I had more time with him." "We all think that." They were quiet. Then he turned to her. "Do you believe in fate?" She considered it. "I believe in timing, and in the courage to respond when the timing's right." Daniel looked at her as if seeing her for the first time again. I don't want to lose you, he whispered. You haven't, she replied. Not long after, Lena began receiving interview requests from several major institutions: Seattle, New York, even Stanford. Word of her recent work with Mayo had traveled, but she declined them all. Daniel asked her why one morning over coffee. Because for the first time in years, she said, I'm not trying to escape. You were escaping before. Not from places, from myself. He reached across the table and took her hand. I think we're both trying to come home. They didn't define what home meant that morning, but both of them knew it had nothing to do with cities or offers. It was a sense of belonging, of choosing to stay. Weeks passed. Richard's health stabilized enough for him to return home. Lena and Daniel helped set up his house for recovery ramps, shower grips, a medication chart. One afternoon, Lena found herself in the backyard again, the same garden where Daniel had once said peace was the real prize. Snow was beginning to melt now, patches of grass peeking through. Grace stepped out beside her. He's grateful for you, Grace said. Lena looked over. Daniel, both of them, Grace replied. But yes, especially Daniel. I don't know what we are, Lena admitted. I'm afraid of saying too much, or too little. Grace nodded. You don't have to name it. Just don't ignore it. That evening, as they drove back to Rochester, Daniel turned to her at a stoplight. I used to believe I was better alone. Simpler, cleaner. She smiled faintly. Me too. He looked ahead again. But alone doesn't feel like strength anymore. It just feels empty. And us? She asked. Messy, complicated, beautiful. The light turned green. They moved forward, together. The Minnesota spring arrived late, shy and hesitant, as if uncertain it was welcome after so many months of gray. Slivers of green crept along sidewalks. Robins returned in bursts of red, and the air lost its bitter edge. In that strange in-between season, no longer winter, not yet warm, Lena's world shifted again. It started with a letter. Not a call, not an email. A letter on thick cream paper, embossed in gold. Stanford University Medical Center. A direct invitation from the director of cardiothoracic research himself, asking Lena to take the newly created chair of innovation in integrative cardiology. Her name had been on a shortlist she hadn't known existed. The role came with its own team, its own funding, full autonomy. California's sun. She stared at the envelope for hours before telling Daniel. He was sitting on the edge of the bed, toweled around his waist, just out of the shower. The way he glanced up when she said his name and guarded, open made the words harder. Got an offer, she said. Stanford. He blinked. That's huge. They want an answer in 10 days. Daniel stood and crossed to the window, rubbing the towel through his damp hair. Are you thinking about it? I don't know, she said honestly. I wasn't expecting it. And it's not just any job. It's everything I thought I wanted. 5 years ago, he turned to her, quiet. And now, she shook her head, uncertain. Now it feels like I'm being asked to choose between two lives. Daniel leaned against the window frame. I don't want to be something you leave behind again. The words hit harder than he intended. I'm not planning to leave you, she said. But you're thinking about leaving this, he replied. Us, what we've built. She swallowed. I'm not sure what we've built yet. Silence stretched between them. Then Daniel nodded. Once, okay. It was the kind of okay that meant he heard her, but couldn't yet hold the weight of it. Later that week, Lena found herself alone at the clinic, waiting for the results of a routine blood panel. Her energy had been off. She'd blamed stress, long shifts, too many sleepless nights. But something in her had whispered, check, just check. When her phone rang and the nurse asked her to come in for the results, Lena's pulse tightened. They didn't ask you to come in unless it mattered. In the quiet room with soft lighting and sterile smells, the physician delivered the news in clinical precision. Her hormone levels, her cycle irregularity, the blood markers. She was pregnant, 8 weeks along. The words didn't register at first. They floated in the air like foreign shapes. When she stepped out into the sunlight, she felt like she'd stepped into a different life. She didn't tell Daniel that night, or the next. She watched him. Instead watched how he moved through the kitchen, how he adjusted the pillow under her back, without being asked, how he listened when her patients' names came out, with tremors of worry. And she wondered, was she strong enough to give up what she thought she wanted, or strong enough to chase it with a child? 3 days later, she walked into the pediatric ICU for a consult and found Daniel already there. He was leaning over a toddler's chart, brows furrowed. When he saw her, His face softened. "We should talk," she said quietly. He led her into an empty family room, the kind meant for delivering hard news. Lena wondered if he noticed how often their truth was told in borrowed spaces. "I'm pregnant," she said. The words landed with the weight of a tidal wave. Daniel stared at her, unmoving. His face so expressive, so easily read, became unreadable. "Are you sure?" he asked, finally. "I had 2 sets of tests. I've been ... off for weeks." He sat down, slowly. After a long silence, he said, "Okay," she blinked. "That's it." He looked up. "What do you want me to say?" "I don't know," she said, more vulnerable than she intended. "Anything but okay." Daniel exhaled. "It's not just a word. It's me saying I'm still here, that I'm not running, that we're in this, whatever this becomes." Her shoulders relaxed, but only slightly. "You're not mad." "Mad." He gave a dry laugh. "Lena, I love you. I didn't expect this, but ... part of me isn't even surprised. We've been rebuilding a life maybe life decided to build with us." She sat beside him. "I don't know how to do this," she said. "Me neither, but we'll learn." He took her hand, resting it over the place on her belly that still felt impossibly abstract. "That's the thing about timing," he whispered. "It rarely asks for permission." Days passed. The Stanford deadline loomed. Lena walked through the campus of Mayo like she might never see it again. The hallways felt different, more intimate. The rooms held echoes. She watched residents rush between labs, staff exchanging clipped instructions, families in waiting rooms praying in silence. These halls had seen her falter and rise, loved and unraveled. They had held the version of her that had run, and the one that had returned. One evening, she and Daniel drove to Silver Lake, just outside Rochester, where bare trees swayed above mirrored waters. They walked the perimeter, slow and quiet. There, hands brushing, then clasping. "I could still take it," she said. "I know," he replied. "You'd come with me, if you asked. But I don't think you will." She stopped walking. "Why?" He looked at her carefully. "Because I don't think that version of you exists anymore." Lena felt her breath catch. "You think I've changed. I think you remembered who you were before the world told you who to be." They stood by the water for a long time. Then she said, "I want this baby. I want this life. I don't want to run anymore." Daniel nodded. "Then we stay." The next day, she declined the Stanford offer. She didn't announce it. She didn't celebrate. She simply hit reply on the email and said thank you. But no. Then she closed her laptop and walked into the garden behind the hospital, where tulips were beginning to bloom. It was enough. Weeks turned into months. Spring gave way to summer. Lena's belly rounded gently beneath her white coats. The staff at Mayo knew now. Some whispered. Some offered hugs. Others brought her snacks. She slowed down, but not too much. She still led surgeries, still taught rounds, but now her presence held a new rhythm, a quieter certainty. She wasn't chasing anything anymore. Daniel adjusted to. He was gentle in his strength, watchful without hovering. He went with her to every appointment, sat through every ultrasound. At night, he read aloud from books neither of them had time to finish. Sometimes they didn't speak, just lay beside each other, her hand on his chest, his over hers. They weren't perfect. They still argued about nursery colors, about schedules, about who forgot to replace the almond milk. But their arguments ended in laughter or quiet apology, not silence. One late evening, just before her 3rd trimester began, Lena stood in the nursery they were slowly assembling. She touched the edge of the crib, still unassembled. Her fingers lingered on the wall where she imagined they'd hang photos of their child. Daniel came in behind her, wrapped his arms around her waist. "You okay?" he murmured. She nodded. "I'm scared sometimes." "Me too. But not of the wrong things anymore," she said. He kissed the side of her head. "Then we're ready." That night, she wrote a letter, to herself, to the version of her that once believed love meant loss. That ambition had to cost intimacy. That coming home was failure. She wrote about fear, about rediscovery, about the terrifying beauty of starting over. She wrote about Daniel, how he was not the man she'd left behind, but the one who had grown alongside her into something steadier, kinder, more whole. She signed it simply. "You made it back, and you're not alone." The town of Stillwater leaned gently into the St. Croix River. Its historic buildings dusted in early autumn gold, leaves scattering across cobblestone streets like silent confetti. A warm wind curled along the bluffs. and in the distance, the old lift bridge stood still against the sky, turning the color of soft peach and fading lavender. It was the kind of day you might wish to bottle and keep forever. Lena stood at the edge of the water, her hands resting just below the swell of her belly, now unmistakably full with the life growing inside her. The last weeks of pregnancy had slowed her, changed her rhythm, softened her gait, but her mind remained sharp, her voice steady, her presence if anything more grounded than it had ever been. Behind her, laughter echoed from the open-air terrace of the old inn where guests were beginning to gather. White chairs lined the manicured lawn, trimmed in eucalyptus and wildflowers, simple and honest. A string quartet tuned quietly, the cellist smiling beneath her soft curls. No arch, no stage, just the open sky, the river, and the steady pulse of a day that mattered not because it was perfect, but because it was real. Daniel adjusted his cufflinks in the mirror upstairs, pausing to press his palm briefly to his chest as if to calm something inside. His reflection showed a man both older and lighter than the one who once walked Mayo's halls with a guarded heart. The tuxedo was classic, dark slate. His smile, when it came, was gentle, even reverent. Michael clapped a hand on his shoulder. "You're ready, brother." Daniel laughed, not the nervous kind, but something quiet and sincere. "I've never been more certain of anything." Olivia, Lena's childhood friend who had flown in from DC, helped her pin a small cluster of baby's breath behind her ear. "You look like someone who just discovered what the word belonging really means," Olivia said. Lena didn't reply at first. She simply nodded, eyes glassy, breath deep. "It doesn't feel like a beginning," she said softly. "It feels like ... recognition, like I've finally stopped running in circles." When she stepped onto the grass, arm looped through her brother's, the wind caught the hem of her dress, a long, flowing ivory wrap that draped around her belly like a second breath. There was no veil, no pretense, just Lena, radiant, not in spite of her scars, but because of them. Daniel turned as she approached, his breath catching slightly before he exhaled. If time paused then, no one blamed it. The ceremony was brief, made up of words they had chosen together. There were no grand declarations, only truths they had earned. "I promise not to fix you," Daniel said, voice steady, "but to sit with you in whatever needs mending. And I promise not to lose myself in love," Lena replied, "but to keep becoming someone worth loving alongside you." They exchanged rings, simple gold bands, no diamonds, no engraving. What bound them needed no embellishment. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was soft but full, like a collective exhale from every person who had witnessed their long journey home. The reception was held under string lights and open sky. No speeches, no schedule, just stories, shared between bites of roast vegetables and lemon-herbed chicken, between sips of wine and sparkling water. Madeline Pierce arrived late. Surgery had run long but hugged them both with a kind of fierce tenderness. "I always knew you two would find your way," she said, raising a glass. "You just needed to remember where you left each other." As twilight deepened into night, Lena sat on the wraparound porch, barefoot, a wool shawl around her shoulders. Daniel joined her, 2 mugs of chamomile tea in hand. "Do you ever think about the version of us that never reconnected?" she asked. "I used to," he said, "but then I realized, ... that version wouldn't have survived everything we've learned since. Would we have even liked each other? Maybe," he said, "but we wouldn't have respected each other the way we do now." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "It took almost losing everything to realize what mattered." "You didn't lose everything," he whispered. "You just lost the things that couldn't come with you." She closed her eyes. The wind carried sounds from inside, laughter, clinking glasses, the distant rhythm of a slow waltz. Lena stirred. "Do you want to dance? Even if you waddle?" "Especially if I waddle." They danced there, alone on the porch, swaying gently as if the night itself were singing for them. Months passed. Winter returned, and with it, their daughter. She came into the world just before dawn on a snow-blanketed January morning. Her name was Clara Elise Reyes, and she had her mother's calm eyes and her father's dimpled chin. Daniel wept the moment he held her, something ancient and soft breaking loose inside him. Lena, exhausted but lucid, whispered, "She already knows your voice." At home, life recalibrated. Clara cried often, teeny, indignant sounds that seemed too big for her body. Lena paced through nights with her pressed against her chest, whispering old poems and stories of heartbeats and hospitals, of years that had once felt lonely and now felt earned. Daniel read to her fables, scientific papers, anything in his cadence of comfort. Their home was not perfect. There were missed feedings, shattered mugs, arguments over who last changed the diaper. But every moment felt rooted, honest. One night, after Clara had fallen asleep, Daniel turned to Lena. "Do you regret not going to Stanford?" She looked at him for a long moment. "No," she said. "I think the person who wanted Stanford doesn't exist anymore." "What about the research, the team, the title?" She smiled. "I traded it for something I never knew I wanted more." Daniel reached for her hand. "You became someone I never imagined I'd deserve. You became someone who let me love without asking me to shrink." Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, time slowed in the warm hush of contentment. Years from now, they would tell Clara's stories, not fairy tales, but true ones, about mistakes and second chances, about choosing not what was easiest or most impressive, but what was real, about how sometimes the bravest thing is not to chase, but to stay, to tend the soil beneath your feet, to let the heart remember. In the end, home was never a place, it was a person, a truth, a quiet knowing, and that was where they once belonged, where they always would. The story of Dr. Lena Morgan and Dr. Daniel Reyes is not just a love story, it's a map of rediscovery, a tale about how two lives, once intertwined and then torn apart by fear, pride, and ambition, found their way back to each other through honesty, growth, and vulnerability. From the sterile halls of Mayo Clinic to the quiet evenings on a still water porch, their journey wasn't linear. It was layered with second chances, internal reckoning, and the slow, patient rebuilding of trust. Lena, once driven solely by professional validation, learned that success without belonging is hollow. Daniel, once emotionally guarded and married to his career, opened himself to the discomfort of love and the grace of forgiveness. Their paths weren't perfect, and that's what made their union so profound. They didn't meet again as the same people they were 20 years earlier. They had each endured loss, disappointment, and the slow erosion of youthful certainty. But what they gained in return was the maturity to choose each other, not out of longing or nostalgia, but out of clarity and conscious love. They built their home on moments that most would overlook: early morning coffees, shared silences, tired lullabies, late-night confessions. They didn't chase perfection, they chose presence. And in doing so, they didn't just reclaim a lost relationship, they redefined what it means to belong. Their story teaches us that sometimes the most meaningful destinations aren't reached by blazing new trails, but by revisiting the old ones with wiser eyes and steadier steps. It's a reminder that the heart doesn't forget where it once felt safe. It only waits for us to become brave enough to return. The life lesson and how to apply it. This story isn't just fiction, it's a mirror. It asks us to reflect. What parts of our lives have we rushed past in pursuit of something shinier? What relationships have we let go, not because they failed, but because we were not ready to face ourselves within them? The lesson is simple but profound. Real connection requires real presence. In a world addicted to achievement, speed, and reinvention, there is quiet courage in slowing down, making amends, and choosing people with intention. In your own life, perhaps there's a person, a passion, or a version of yourself waiting, not to be discovered, but remembered. Audience interaction question for you. Were in Lena's shoes, what would you have done? A. Chosen the prestigious Stanford position and left the past behind. B. Stayed and rebuilt your life with Daniel at Mayo Clinic. Comment your answer below with A or B. Now we want to hear from you. What touched you the most in Lena and Daniel's journey? Have you ever experienced something similar, letting go of the right person, only to rediscover them later in life? Drop your thoughts in the comments below so others can learn from your experience. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or gave you something to reflect on, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that love is not lost, it's waiting. Together, let's keep telling stories that heal.